10 billion years before the first microscopic organism appeared, the universe was already active. Stars formed, galaxies rotated, and heavy elements synthesized in the void. This timeline creates a problem for modern physics. Certain interpretations of quantum mechanics require an observer to lock potential states into a definite physical reality. If that is true, we have to ask what exactly was doing the observing for those initial 10 billion years. The default assumption has always been that observation requires a living mind. We place our own consciousness at the absolute center of reality, treating the pre-life universe as a dark stage, waiting for a biological audience to arrive. To solve this paradox, the definition of an observer has to shift. Instead of a biological invention, we have to look for a mechanism built into the structure of matter itself, an architecture that existed long before the first cell. When we detach the concept of an observer from human biology, we no longer need eyes, a brain, or even a cellular structure. This is the core architecture. A single node, the operator, interacts with a surrounding field of wave-like potential states, locking them into a structured grid. The operator anchors a specific position. The wave field represents mathematical possibilities, and the grid is the resulting physical reality. Because this interaction is entirely structural, it scales. Any configuration capable of this feedback loop, from a single subatomic particle to an entire galaxy, functions mathematically as an observer. We see this dynamic playing out immediately after the Big Bang, long before complex chemistry existed. This diagram illustrates an atom functioning as an elementary, strange loop. A proton, neutron, and electron lock into a cyclical feedback pattern. These subatomic components constantly stabilize one another. Their properties form a self-contained system observing itself, requiring no external verification. This atomic architecture multiplied rapidly. By the time the early universe cooled, roughly 10 to the power of 80 of these atomic observers were interacting, calculating gradients, and linking together. The early cosmos was saturated with non-biological observation. Trillions of tiny structural interactions actively compiled the massive configurations of early stars and galaxies. When organic life eventually emerged on Earth, it introduced a new level of complexity to a process that was already running. We measure that complexity through dimensionality. It tracks how intricately an observer can process and respond to its environment. At dimension 1, single-celled organisms observe basic chemical gradients. They detect a food source or a toxin and physically move in response. At dimension 2, multicellular life develops nervous systems. The brain's primary job at this stage is to coordinate billions of individual cellular observers into a single cohesive action. The human prefrontal cortex pushes this capacity further. It provides the biological hardware needed for an observer to reflect on its own internal state. Humanity occupies a specific point on an ancient, ongoing spectrum. We exist at the precise dimensionality where the universe developed the capacity for internal reflection. Modern biology correctly points out that we are biological machines. Our decisions are heavily determined by genetic code, hormonal fluctuations, and past experiences. But this introduces a mechanical bypass called recursion. The operator node projects a beam backward, illuminating its exact source. By directing attention onto our own programming, the internal geometry shifts. The node alters its output trajectory. We call this conscious context choice. The sequence is strictly physical. You choose to step into a cold shower. That context spikes your noradrenaline and dopamine. This neurochemistry alters your physical behavior, which mathematically increases the probability of hitting a specific goal. There is no mystical manifestation happening here. We are managing our own biological operators, physically rewiring our habits to change the probabilities of the reality around us. As we map this architecture, we run into a hard mathematical boundary known as Ashby's law of requisite variety. It dictates that a regulator must possess as much complexity as the system it regulates. Because we exist inside the universe, our cognitive complexity will always be a fraction of the whole. A piece of the system cannot completely describe the entire system. We cannot write a perfect formula for every atom in existence, but we can map the exact architecture of how we interact with those atoms and use that map to navigate our options. Ultimately, our modern biology connects us directly to the very first atomic structures that cooled in the darkness of the primordial void. We are not the center of the cosmos, but through recursive thought, we represent a specific stage where the observer recognizes its own constraints, allowing a system to deliberately adjust its own trajectory within the landscape of possibilities.